1 minute ago, something began unfolding along North America's most important river that scientists still cannot fully explain. The Mississippi River, the vast waterway that drains nearly half the continent, is losing water at a scale that defies every established rule of hydrology. There was no earthquake to rupture the ground, no historic drought to dry the basin, no massive diversion channel siphoning water away. And yet, somewhere between Cairo, Illinois, and the Gulf of Mexico, an enormous portion of the river's volume is simply disappearing. According to federal measurements, as much as 47% of the Mississippi's expected downstream flow is missing. Engineers are not debating small discrepancies or seasonal variations. They are confronting a loss so large it exceeds the entire annual flow of some major rivers. The data should not be possible, and yet it continues to repeat itself day after day. The Mississippi River is not just a river, it is the backbone of a continent. Its watershed spans 41% of the continental United States, gathering runoff from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Snowmelt from the Rockies, rainfall from the Midwest, and stormwater from Appalachia all converge into this single channel. At Vicksburg, Mississippi, the river typically carries more than 500 cubic kilometers of water each year, placing it among the largest river systems on Earth. For more than a century, the Mississippi behaved in ways engineers understood. Its seasonal rises and falls were predictable. Its discharge followed patterns refined through decades of observation. Entire economies were built on that reliability, but now those patterns are breaking down. Upstream gauges continue to report normal volumes entering the system. Rainfall across the basin remains near historical averages. Tributaries are contributing expected flows, yet downstream gauges show a dramatic decline. The missing water is not appearing in floodplains, reservoirs, or diversion systems. It is simply gone. This matters because the Mississippi supports one of the most critical economic corridors on the planet. Each year, more than 500 million tons of cargo move along its waters. Grain, coal, petroleum, chemicals, steel, and fertilizer all depend on the river's depth and flow. A single barge convoy can carry as much cargo as hundreds of trucks, making the river the most efficient transportation artery in the nation. Nearly 60% of American grain exports pass through this system. The ports of southern Louisiana handle a fifth of all U.S. waterborne commerce. Power plants rely on the river for cooling. Cities rely on it for drinking water. Farms across 8 states depend on it for irrigation. Remove the Mississippi and you remove the circulatory system of the American economy. Yet something inside that system has changed. To understand what is happening now, scientists have had to look backward. The transformation began not recently, but nearly a century ago. In 1927, the Mississippi unleashed the most devastating flood in U.S. history. More than 27,000 square miles were submerged. Hundreds of people died. Entire towns were erased. In response, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1928, assigning full responsibility for the river to the federal government. The Army Corps of Engineers embarked on a monumental effort to tame the river. Thousands of miles of levees were built. Floodwalls rose along vulnerable banks. Dams and locks were installed upstream. Channels were dredged and straightened. The river was confined, controlled, and reshaped into infrastructure. The effort succeeded. Floods that once destroyed entire regions were largely contained. Navigation became reliable year-round. Communities expanded confidently behind protective walls. For decades, the system appeared to work perfectly. But rivers are not static machines. They are dynamic systems governed by physics, sediment, pressure, and time. When the Mississippi was confined between levees, its energy had nowhere to go but downward. Faster flow scoured the riverbed. Sediment that once replenished the channel was trapped behind upstream dams. Over time, the river began eroding itself from the inside out. Scientists now believe the Mississippi's bed has undergone a fundamental transformation. Core samples extracted from beneath the channel show that the natural layered structure of clay, silt, and sand has been destroyed. These layers once acted as barriers, limiting how much water could move downward. Now they are gone, replaced by a highly permeable mix that allows water to pass through with little resistance. In simple terms, the riverbed has turned into a sponge. This change alone would be concerning, but it is not acting alone. Beneath the river lies the Mississippi Valley Alluvial Aquifer, one of the most heavily pumped groundwater systems in North America. Decades of agricultural withdrawals have lowered groundwater levels across vast areas. In some regions, water tables have dropped by tens of feet. This created a powerful pressure imbalance. The river now sits above a depleted aquifer that is effectively pulling water downward. As river levels rise, water seeps through the weakened bed and drains into the ground below. What scientists are observing is not leakage, but a continental-scale induced infiltration event. The Mississippi is no longer just transporting water to the Gulf. It is actively recharging the ground beneath it, whether it can afford to or not. And this is only the beginning. As scientists began piecing together what was happening beneath the Mississippi River, the implications grew far larger than a simple measurement error or temporary anomaly. The data pointed toward a system that had crossed a threshold. What once behaved like a stable artery was beginning to act like a drain. At the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center, hydrologists noticed the first warning signs in forecast discrepancies. Models that had performed reliably for decades began failing. Water volumes entering the system upstream no longer matched what emerged downstream. The shortfall was not occasional, it was persistent and growing. At first, engineers suspected faulty instruments. Gauges were recalibrated, sensors were replaced, entire segments of the monitoring network were rechecked. The readings did not change, the water was still missing. The next theory focused on human withdrawal. Agriculture across the Mississippi Delta relies heavily on irrigation drawn from both surface water and groundwater. According to United States Geological Survey data, billions of gallons are pumped daily from the Mississippi Valley alluvial aquifer. It was reasonable to ask whether farms were quietly draining the river. But the numbers did not support the idea. Agricultural withdrawals had remained relatively stable for years. There was no sudden spike large enough to explain the accelerating loss of river flow. Pumping records showed no anomalies. The farms were not the culprit. Investigators then examined the levee system itself. Thousands of miles of earthen embankments separate the river from its natural floodplain. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan for hidden breaches or seepage paths. The levees were intact. In fact, they were performing exactly as designed. What the investigation uncovered instead forced scientists to rethink decades of river engineering assumptions. Core samples extracted from beneath the Mississippi revealed a profound structural change. Historically, the riverbed consisted of layered sediments. Clay layers limited vertical water movement. Sand layers allowed horizontal flow. This stratification acted as a natural regulator, keeping the river's energy moving downstream rather than downward. Those layers are now largely gone. Decades of confined flow scoured the bed relentlessly. Without periodic flooding to deposit fresh sediment, the river eroded deeper into its foundation. Upstream dams compounded the problem by trapping sediment that once replenished the channel. Research shows that dams on the Missouri River alone capture more than 100 million metric tons of sediment each year. The lower Mississippi became sediment-starved. As erosion progressed, the bed lost its structure. Instead of layered resistance, it became a homogenized mass of permeable material. Water could now move vertically with ease. The river was no longer sealed from the ground beneath it. At the same time, the aquifer below was being drained. Intensive pumping for agriculture lowered groundwater levels across thousands of square miles. This created a powerful hydraulic gradient. The river sat above an underground system desperate for recharge. Water follows pressure. The physics are simple. When resistance disappears and pressure differences exist, flow accelerates. The Mississippi was being pulled downward. This phenomenon is known as induced infiltration. It is common near wells or small streams, but never before documented at this scale. The Mississippi was not just leaking. It was actively feeding the depleted aquifer beneath it. As river volume declined, the consequences spread quickly. In southern Louisiana, municipal water systems began noticing changes. Water tasted different. Corrosion accelerated inside pipes. Treatment plants detected rising salinity. Saltwater from the Gulf of Mexico was moving upstream. Normally, the Mississippi's strong downstream flow prevents seawater intrusion, but as volume dropped, that barrier weakened. In dry periods, dense saltwater began creeping inland along the riverbed, forming a wedge that pushed farther upstream each year. In 2023, the saltwater intrusion advanced farther than any time in recent memory, threatening drinking water supplies for nearly 1 million people. The Army Corps of Engineers responded by constructing underwater sills, massive mounds of material designed to block the saltwater's advance. The effort cost tens of millions of dollars and offered only temporary relief. Meanwhile, navigation along the river deteriorated. Barge pilots who had worked the Mississippi for decades noticed changes long before official reports confirmed them. Channels that once carried fully loaded barges began forcing draft restrictions. Sandbars appeared where none had existed. Groundings became routine. In October 2022, more than 2,000 barges were stranded along the river due to shallow water conditions. Cargo backed up for miles. Grain exports slowed. Shipping costs skyrocketed. USGS gauges recorded water levels at Memphis reaching -12 feet, the lowest ever measured. Freight rates surged as barge capacity collapsed. Farmers watched transportation costs erase profits. Entire supply chains strained under conditions no one had planned for. The ecological consequences were equally severe. Lower water levels increased temperatures in shallow channels, stressing fish populations. Mussel beds that once filtered millions of gallons of water daily began dying off. Wetlands along the Mississippi Flyway lost critical habitat, disrupting migration routes used by hundreds of bird species. This was not a single failure, it was a cascading collapse. Federal agencies briefed Congress using careful language, but the message was clear. The system had entered a structural regime shift. The losses were unsustainable. The trend was accelerating. Proposed solutions revealed the depth of the problem. Releasing more water from upstream reservoirs offered limited benefit. The additional water infiltrated through the permeable bed before reaching downstream areas. Restricting groundwater pumping shifted demand towards surface water, increasing stress on the river itself. Emergency dredging became continuous rather than seasonal. Each intervention fought symptoms rather than causes. Scientists presented their findings at national conferences. One conclusion resonated across disciplines. The historical behavior of the Mississippi River can no longer be used to predict its future. The river had not failed, it had adapted to the conditions imposed upon it. The same infrastructure that protected communities from floods had altered the physics of water movement. The same dams that stabilized navigation had starved the system of sediment. The same aquifer pumping that fed agriculture had created a pressure sink beneath the river. Together, these changes transformed the Mississippi from a transport-dominated system into an infiltration-dominated one. The river was no longer just flowing to the sea. It was draining into the earth once scientists accepted that the Mississippi River was no longer behaving like a closed system. The next question became unavoidable. Could it be restored, or had it crossed a boundary that could not be reversed? To answer that, researchers began looking for historical analogs. Rivers around the world have been engineered, dammed, and confined, but none on the scale of the Mississippi. Smaller systems offered clues, though none were comforting. In heavily pumped basins in India and northern China, rivers that once flowed year-round now disappear seasonally into the ground. These systems did not collapse overnight. They transitioned slowly, then suddenly. Once groundwater levels dropped beyond a certain depth, surface water permanently shifted into recharge mode. That transition is extremely difficult to undo. The Mississippi shows signs of entering the same regime. Groundwater levels beneath the lower basin have declined for decades. In some areas of Arkansas and Mississippi, the alluvial aquifer has dropped more than 100 feet since the mid-20th century. Recharge rates cannot keep pace with extraction. Even if pumping stopped today, recovery would take generations. Engineers evaluated whether restoring sediment could reseal the riverbed. On paper, it sounds simple. Add material, rebuild layers, reduce permeability. In reality, it is nearly impossible. The volume of sediment required is staggering. The Mississippi once carried enough sediment to build entire wetlands each year. Today, more than 70% of that sediment is trapped behind dams upstream. Releasing it would require redesigning or removing major reservoirs, many of which supply power, flood control, and water to millions of people. Even if sediment were released, it would not behave as it once did. Confined channels prevent natural deposition. The river no longer spreads out and slows during floods. It rushes forward, carrying sediment straight to the Gulf rather than laying it down where it is needed. Another proposal involved artificial liners, essentially sealing portions of the riverbed with engineered barriers. The idea works for canals. It fails for rivers of this size. The Mississippi shifts constantly. Its bed migrates, it scours, it redeposits. Any rigid structure would be undermined within years, possibly months. Maintenance costs would be astronomical, and failure could create sudden collapses far worse than gradual loss. Some scientists suggested a more radical approach: let the river flood again. By reconnecting the Mississippi to parts of its natural floodplain, water could slow, spread, and deposit sediment naturally. Groundwater recharge would occur across wide areas rather than pulling directly from the channel. In theory, this could rebalance the system. In practice, it collides with reality. More than 15 million people live behind Mississippi River levees. Cities, industries, ports, and farms occupy land that was once floodplain. Controlled flooding would require relocating communities, buying out property, and accepting seasonal inundation in areas that have been dry for generations. Politically, economically, and socially, this solution is nearly impossible to implement at scale. As debates continued, another threat emerged. Climate change is amplifying every weakness in the system. Rainfall across the Mississippi Basin is becoming more intense but less evenly distributed. Instead of steady seasonal flows, the river now experiences longer droughts punctuated by extreme floods. When floods come, water moves too fast to replenish the aquifer. When droughts persist, infiltration accelerates. Higher temperatures increase evaporation. Warmer water holds less oxygen, stressing aquatic life. Sea level rise pushes saltwater farther upstream, increasing pressure on freshwater supplies even during normal conditions. Each factor feeds the others. In 2024, a multi-agency report warned that under current trends, the Mississippi could experience chronic low-flow conditions within decades, even in years without drought. Navigation seasons would shorten, water treatment costs would rise, ecosystems would shift permanently. The river that built North America's interior economy would become unreliable. This realization has triggered a subtle but profound shift in how scientists talk about the Mississippi, no longer as a fixed asset to be managed, but as a dynamic system that responds to pressure. The language has changed from control to adaptation. Instead of asking how to force the river back into its historical behavior, planners are beginning to ask how communities can survive alongside a river that behaves differently. Ports are redesigning loading schedules around lower drafts. Farmers are experimenting with less water-intensive crops. Cities are investing in alternative water sources rather than relying solely on the river. These adaptations acknowledge a hard truth: the Mississippi may never return to what it was. Perhaps the most sobering insight came from satellite data. High-resolution gravity measurements revealed mass loss beneath the basin consistent with large-scale groundwater depletion. This is not just a surface phenomenon. It is a restructuring of water storage across an entire region. When water leaves the ground, the land responds. Subsidence has already been detected in parts of the delta. As land sinks, flood risk increases, saltwater intrusion worsens, and wetlands disappear faster. The system enters a feedback loop. Less groundwater leads to more river loss. More river loss leads to greater salt intrusion. Salt damages vegetation. Vegetation loss accelerates erosion. Erosion deepens channels. Deeper channels increase infiltration. Each step reinforces the next. Scientists refer to this as a tipping cascade. Once underway, it is extremely difficult to stop because each process strengthens the conditions that caused it. The Mississippi River Basin Commission summarized it plainly. The river is not dying, it is transforming. Whether that transformation becomes catastrophic depends on decisions made now. Do we continue extracting water faster than it can be replaced? Do we maintain infrastructure designed for a climate that no longer exists? Do we prioritize short-term economic stability over long-term system resilience? These are not engineering questions alone, they are societal choices. The Mississippi once symbolized abundance, endless water, endless transport, endless growth. That narrative no longer matches reality. For the first time in modern history, the river's future is uncertain. And that uncertainty is spreading.